The justice system is based on the idea that there is a right way to treat every crime and unfair act. Punishments make sure that people who do wrong pay for their actions, both in the past and now. These punishments usually included, and still do include, paying fines and doing jobs to make up for what was done. In the worst case, the public killing was meant to teach a lesson and keep people from breaking the law again. But sometimes, especially in the Middle Ages, punishments were so harsh that they scared everyone who heard about or saw them. From the past to the present, we'll cover the top 10 punishments that, looking back, didn't fit the act. The Blood Eagle. Both Norsemen and Scandinavian Vikings were responsible for raiding monasteries and coastal communities during the Middle Ages. Their daring exploits caused fear among the populace. Vikings, who were known for being the most brutal raiding warriors, journeyed all over the world in search of booty, committed murder, and took victims as slaves. However, despite their reputation for being fierce in other parts of the world, the Vikings were a civilized civilization that had established procedures for punishing anyone who committed wrongdoing in their homeland. The Blood Eagle is one of the most well-known Norse execution practices, and it continues to be startling even to this day. Blood Eagle was carried out by a son against the one who was responsible for the death of their father. The executioner in the Blood Eagle opened the back of the person who was being executed. In order to generate the appearance of wings, the ribs were disjointed from the backbone and bent upwards. Following this, the executioner removed the lungs and hung them over the wings. After that, the executioner applied salt to the wound in order to provide the most amount of suffering possible. The suffering that was inflicted upon the perpetrators by the ritual punishment was incomprehensible, and they ultimately passed away as a result of their injuries. Lingqi, death by 1,000 cuts. The history of China is replete with stories of powerful dynasties, heroic deeds, and victories that contributed to the nation's rise to prominence. Nevertheless, there is one cruel tradition that originated in ancient China that is so horrifying that it is difficult to comprehend. Lingqi, sometimes known as slow slicing, was the name of the punishment. It was held in reserve for the most serious offenses such as treason and mass murder. It is possible to infer from the term that Lingqi, which is often referred to as death by 1,000 cuts, was a cruel kind of punishment in which the executioner took their time in executing a lawbreaker. The condemned was then cut into pieces after being bound to a post for a period of time. Subsequently, the executioner removed pieces in a gradual manner in order to expose the underlying tissue. Because Chinese law never prescribed a particular method for carrying out the penalty, the manner in which it was carried out differed from one place to another. While the accused was subjected to over 3,000 cuts in certain locations, the process in other locations only required a few cuts and a short amount of time. In either case, the amount of time required varied based on the officials and the degree of compassion they had for the detainee. Execution by elephant. In spite of the fact that elephants are revered by a variety of cultures, others have discovered innovative ways to make them useful to society. Elephants are majestic and proud creatures. Unfortuitously, in this context, useful refers to a device that can be used to punish. However, despite their magnificent appearance, elephants are also quite massive and powerful animals. Executors made certain that the death by elephant operation was as dramatic as it could possibly be. Elephants were responsible for the deaths of those who were accused in South and Southeast Asia. It is referred to as Gunga Rao in India, which means punishment by an elephant. People who had committed serious offences such as treason, tax evasion, and insurrection were the only ones who could receive it. In each of these instances, the elephants crushed the plaintiff in a deliberate manner, beginning with the lower limbs and working their way upwards gradually. The punishment in Thailand was more elaborate than in other countries, since the elephants were trained to throw the convicted person into the air. To punish those who committed wrongdoing in Vietnam, they were tied to stakes, and an elephant would charge at them, crushing them as it approached. Death by cannon fire. There were formidable weapons known as cannons that were utilized by armies to destroy their adversaries from a great distance and to break down fortifications when it was necessary. During the time that the British controlled Punjab, soldiers used cannons to put down rebellious individuals and instill fear among the populace. Although it was successful, it was not a widely accepted strategy. When victims were subjected to this cruel kind of punishment, their wrists and feet were tied to the front of cannons and their buttocks were placed over the mouth of the cannon. Following the firing of the cannon by the executioner, the accused had already passed away, leaving behind only fragments of their body. As a result of the extremely raw nature of the approach, everyone in the vicinity of the cannon was immediately covered in blood and entrails whenever it was fired. Keel hauling. Back in the days when the only way to go across the world was by water, sailing was a career option that was both exciting and gratifying. However, it is in your best interest to have a positive relationship with your supervisor. Keel hauling was a practice that captains utilized as a form of punishment for disloyalty. It was the Dutch army that perfected the keel hauling, which was a form of punishment that could be administered at any moment while the ship was at sea. The penalty, which may be lethal or not, required the offender to be tied with rope, and then the captain would drag them underwater from the left side of the ship to the right side of the ship. The punishment was terrible because the person may be torn apart by the keel or the bottom of the ship while they were being carried under the ship, and in the majority of cases, they would drown for their injuries. In spite of this, those who survived the keel hauling were left with horrifying scars that would remain with them for the rest of their lives. Drawn and quartered. When it comes to painful penalties, drawing and quartering are the most peculiar methods ever used. They are the ones that caused viewers to feel anxiety during the event. The executioner will bind the victim to a horse as part of this form of death penalty. They are dragged to the gallows, which is where the execution will take place, by the horse. After being brought to the gallows, they are either disemboweled, beheaded, or hung. A quartering consisted of tying the body of the accused to two powerful horses and then dividing the accused into 4 equal parts. This results in the stallions being pushed to rush in opposite directions, which causes the body to be torn apart in a manner that is quite dramatic. The purpose of the spectacle that was linked with this punishment was to provide the violator with the utmost humiliation and to provide the onlookers with a great deal of enjoyment. As a result of its rarity and limited use, the punishment was well liked because it was reserved for individuals who were guilty of treason. Death by boiling. In the 1500s, executioners used boiling as a way to punish people. Today, boiling is used in cooking and even in industry. In this way of killing people, they were put in big pots that were filled with hot water, oil, wax, and even wine. They died there after being left there. People who were killed by cooking were put through as much pain as possible. Nero, the Roman emperor, was a hot winner. During his rule, many early Christians who were seen as disobedient were boiled in oil. People who were guilty of treason or poisoning their husbands or bosses were boiled to death in England during the reign of Henry VIII. People found death by boiling so interesting that it was done in public, with a huge metal pot set on a huge fire, while people watched a person be boiled alive. For one person, the whole thing could take up to 2 hours. Torture by rats. Fans of medieval films and television series such as Game of Thrones are well aware of the punishment method of torturing rats as a form of punishment. This punishment was utilized by governments to either force confessions from the victim or to teach the victim a lesson. A victim is restrained so that they are unable to move, and a bucket is placed on their chest or stomach. After that, a rat that is either starving or perhaps sick is tossed into the bucket. The person carrying out the execution warms the bucket while the rat is inside. As soon as the rat knows it is caught, it begins to gnaw on the flesh of the victim in an attempt to escape. More often than not, the frantic rat will gnaw its way into the flesh while it is searching for a way out, and in the process, it will create anguish and stress that is beyond comprehension. In spite of the fact that it was possible to survive the punishment, the victim was left with wounds that required a significant amount of time to heal. In spite of the fact that rats are harmless animals, inventive executioners have discovered ways to turn them into lethal weapons. Poena culli, sewn in a bag. In Roman society, when families were considered to be the most important social units, the act of parricides, which was defined as the killing of parents or close relatives, was subject to severe punishments. Poena culli, which literally translates to sewn in a bag, was the Roman term for the punishment that was typically handed out for the crime of parricide. Before carrying out the execution, the condemned were first beaten with rods until they were weak and bleeding. The humans were then placed in a leather sack along with a dog, a rooster, a snake, and a monkey until they were sewn. It was a foregone conclusion that the leather sack would be a chaotic place due to the unique combination of elements. Following that, the executioners dumped the sack that contained the body into the water as if that wasn't enough. In the event that the culprit did not perish as a result of being attacked by the animals, drowning in the ocean would have finished the job. This is a really painful and severe punishment, and it is very unpleasant. Scaphism. Our not-so-pleasant list shows that people in the past came up with a lot of clever ways to kill people who were guilty of killing royalty or who were accused of doing so without proof. But scaphism, also called the boats, is the worst way to punish someone. People who practiced scaphism were pinned between two small boats or tree stumps. They would be tied down so the killer could make sure they couldn't get away. In order for scaphism to work, the bodies of the victims were put in swamps. Still, water is full of bugs and other small animals that are easy to harm. The next part of the sentence was a bit strange. The person was made to drink milk and honey, which was meant to make them have diarrhea. This is where the sour joke comes in. The rest of the mixture was put on the accused's uncovered skin to attract rats, bugs, and wild animals. Most of the time, the accused died from being eaten alive, being left out in the cold, being dehydrated, or having wounds.